Welcome, everyone, to the 15th episode of the Mystery Hour with Con Sweeney at our new time of noon Second Life time, or 3 p.m. Eastern for you folks in real life. Now to what we're about today. We're a monthly show based here in Second Life. We broadcast live here on Facebook and YouTube every third Monday of the month at 12 p.m. Second Life time, or Pacific time, for you folks in real life. Except for today, since we had technical problems last month on November 15th. This is the November 15th show. Don't mean to fake you out. Here, we meet mystery authors and others from the publishing world to talk about books and the issues facing them today from social and technological change. And there's certainly been a lot of those lately. I'd like to thank Draxter Desprez, host of the Second Life Book Club and the Drax Files Radio Hour, both broadcast from Second Life, for his sponsorship and the use of the Book Club Island when we first got started. I'd also like to thank Strawberry Linden and Brett Linden for their help in getting this show up. And finally, my eternal thanks to Becky Hansen and Isabel Charon for all their technical assistance in making this happen. Without you, it wouldn't have been possible. Now, our regular viewers may notice that we're no longer on Book Club Island. The reason that we're not there anymore is that there's a lot going on over there, and setting up for our show was becoming a bit of an effort, so we decided to go off and set up our own studio. And here we are. Now, let me introduce my guest for today, Vera Chan. We're missing somebody else, Abigail Vandiver, who we're hoping will show up, but she's in transit. Vera is a contributing writer to the recently published Midnight Hour, featuring short mysteries from members of the Crime Writers of Color. I'd also like to point out that Abby, who is missing, is an attorney in real life, and if she shows up, she's going to be the first one to appear on our broadcast. We'll get into that a little bit later. Welcome, Vera. How does it feel to be in World?
It is very meta, so to speak. So thank you. Happy holidays. And even though we had to reschedule, time is meaningless in the real world as well as this world, so it's fine.
Okay. Okay. Could you just talk a little bit about yourself, please? Your journey as a writer and what motivated you to write, and what life has been like for you as a writer during the pandemic?
Those are those kinds of questions that begin at childhood. So you can have a very long answer, the short answer. So I'll give you a little bit in between. But of course, I'm one of those people that have always wanted to write. Might have been because my mother had been an English teacher. Might have been because as an immigrant, you learn a lot about the New World by reading the literature that takes place here. But I also wanted to be pragmatic, so to speak. So I decided to go into journalism, which is not saying that I wanted to make a lot of money. I just wanted to be pragmatic. And so I've been having, did my day job in journalism, daily newspapers, weekly magazines, and then moving on to the digital world with companies like Yahoo and Microsoft. But, I've always been writing on the side, and mystery has definitely been certainly one of the genres that is a favorite of mine. And so, I decided that my last job to take was my first one where I did not have writing deadlines. It was still, in the journalism world and in news, but it was the first time I didn't have daily deadlines or that kind of stuff, so that I could focus on the fiction on the side. And so I'm still working on, and my agent is, shopping around 2 manuscripts that I had, but I had the opportunity to contribute a short story to Midnight Hour Anthology, which of course Abby put together, and so that was a great opportunity. So that's how I got involved, and it was being a part of the Crime Writers of Color world as well. And you can see Abby magically appear.
And here's Abby.
Because I evoked her name.
Abby, welcome. Just turn on your microphone, that little button at the bottom, and take a seat, please.
I can go ahead and move to the other seat. Should I do that?
You could stay there. You can stay there.
Okay.
We'll have fewer moving objects on the screen.
But anyway, so that's my abbreviated journey into contributing to the Midnight Hour Anthology.
Okay. Your microphone is not working. Okay. Abby, could you just is that little microphone button at the bottom of your screen showing brown with the check mark? Okay, click on it, and it'll go from gray to brown.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Abby.
Hi.
Great,
Okay.
loud and clear.
Hi,
Now
everyone.
hi. Just right-click on the chair, take a seat.
Well, I have to find the chair first. I have to find the chair first.
So while Abby is finding the chair, yeah, so Midnight Hour came out in early November, and I'm very happy to say that it's gotten some pretty good reviews. Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, New York Journal, New York Times. So we're very excited about all that happening.
That's great.
And we're here talking to you today.
Great. Was this your first published writing, Vera?
It is my first published fiction, correct. I have written about 1 million words in my career. All of them I like to think is true, but this is my first published for fiction.
Great. Well, Abby, thank you for joining us. We were just doing the
That's the
introduction.
hardest thing to do, Con, is to get into this room. Oh my goodness. And then to be able to talk and sit. Okay, but I'm here. Thank you for having me.
We're always glad to have writers join us here, and we realize that with your real lives, things are very difficult out there, especially with the pandemic. So thank you for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Abby, I just introduced Vera and yourself to our audience, talking about your recent book that came out. Vera just gave us a little of her background. Could you give us a little of your background?
Sure.
About how you began as a writer, what motivated you to write, and what it's like to be as a writer during the pandemic?
Well, I used to be a lawyer and a economics professor, and I became ill, almost bedridden, and I couldn't of course, I couldn't go to court or anything. So I wouldn't sit there worrying. I started writing. And I had actually written a book about 10 years earlier. My daughter called and said she found it in her garage, and I thought, oh, good, this is something to do. And I posted it on a website. Harper Collins had a website called Autonomy back then, and other writers would critique it and help you out. And I decided to publish it. So that's how I got started publishing, and I just kept it up.
Great.
So I self-published initially. I've written probably about 30, 35 books and short stories. I self-published the majority of them. And at some point, someone saw my story, one of my books, and Henry Press, a small press that deals mostly in cozy mysteries, a little chick lit, and they asked to publish me. So I said yes. And before the first book came out, an agent contacted me and said she'd like to be my agent. So I had an easy road to traditional publishing, and I've been doing mostly that since.
That's wonderful. I understand from so many writers, trying to get an agent is so difficult. And then,
Yes.
there are a few people out there like yourself who have had the good fortune of one day the phone rang, who was an agent and said, I like your writing. Can I represent you? So more power to you.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you both next about the Crime Writers of Color. Can you tell us a little bit more about the organization? I know it's relatively new compared to some of the other organizations, and how it's helped you and what its goals are.
Well, first, I'd like to say that even though we are all members of Crime Writers of Color, the authors in the anthology, this is not a production of that organization. We aren't affiliated with it in any way. Yeah, but it's a brainchild of Walter Mosley, Gigi Pandian, and Kelly Garrett, and they just understand and realize the lack of diversity in the publishing industry, especially with crime writers, although I believe it's all across the board. And to do something about it, they made a meeting place, a gathering place for other authors of color to come together to, the writing community is such a big thing and such a big help to writers. So it's a place for us to come to discuss the things that are going on with us, to discuss our books, just the camaraderie there and the networking that's there. So it's a great place to be. Keep your ear to the, to the road and to see where everything's going, and to help advance your career as well.
That's wonderful. I just want to point out to our audience that Kelly Garrett, who Abby just mentioned, has been very helpful in helping us to identify writers to join us next year, and that from January to next August, except for June when we don't have a show, every writer on the show will be from the Crime Writers of Color, and we're looking forward to meeting all of them.
Oh, that's awesome.
It is.
Glad to hear that. Yes.
And not only that, we've got some folks coming in from England. So we're very happy about the global reach of the group, and the writers who are going to be with us in 2022. Abby, what's it like to put an anthology together? I know when I talk to writers about writing their own book, it's difficult. It's not easy. But besides doing your own writing, you're bringing everybody together. What's that experience like, and how was it for you?
Oh, it's a lot of work. The writing part is the easy part. When I was a lawyer, I ran my own practice, and I'd always complained that, I had to do all the back office stuff as well as the front office stuff, go to court, but I also had to do all the accounting and record keeping and all those things. And that's pretty much, like it is doing an anthology. So I have to write the story, but I also have to get all the authors together, make sure everything is in on time, make sure the stories are, what was requested. Then there was the signing of the contracts, the address, the Schedule A, as our publisher put it, where I had to get all the personal information and photos of the authors, and it was just a lot of things to do. Seeing that we had 19 other authors beside myself, as well as Stephen Mac Jones, who wrote our foreword. Getting information into the publisher, and it's all over email. I'd get so many emails from people sending me things back, and everything will get lost in the email. So that part of it was kind of tedious, but I tell you the best part, getting a anthology together, getting it published, traditionally published. I was even unsure when we started if we'd be able to do that. I had to act as agent, something I hadn't done, and get us a traditional publisher. Those things were fun, and I think they well overcompensated for all the work I had to do in the background.
It's wonderful. Okay,
I kind of want to reinforce what Abby. I actually want to reinforce how much work Abby did, because I feel like, again, I am a newbie in this world, but I feel like she pulled this together in record time. And did we mention a pandemic? So even though she floated the idea right before the pandemic, really the heart of this happened as well during. And so I think it's kind of an extraordinary effort. And having the infrastructure of the Crime Writers of Color was amazing. And then Abby's expertise in, I would wager, law and economics helped a little bit with all this as well.
Well, the question I got for Abby is, will you do it again?
Oh, yes, definitely. I used to do this sort of thing when I self-published. It's hard to be recognized, as a self-published author, and associating yourself with other authors helps get your name out, helps to create a larger fan base. And I had hoped to do that here, to get writers like Vera, who hadn't been published, fiction hadn't been published before, and other authors that maybe were self-published, to get them out into the, traditionally published world. So yes, I would definitely do it again. I think it's well worth it. The anthology has seemed to be well received. We got a starred review from Publishers Weekly. We got a write-up in the New York Times. So, and it's a great way for writers to come together and showcase our work. Very
good. Very good. Now, Vera, could you tell us a little bit about your contribution to the anthology? What inspired you to write the story? Is there any of you in it, or is it strictly impersonal?
Let's see. Well, I will say that I actually had the story floating around for a little time, and so when this opportunity came up, the only thing I really had to do was make sure that all the action happened around midnight. That was the minimum requirement. It's a bit of I call it corporate noir, and so if you ask if there's a little bit of me in there, only because I know all the outrageous cliches of the world, right, in which I operate. I will say my day-to-day is not as exciting, and even though you always say, write what you know. I never killed anyone either, but yet I'm writing in mystery. So, but I did. What's in it for me is almost kind of looking at the world from the inside, but with an outsider parody perspective.
Good. Good. Now, Abby, could you tell us a little bit more about the other works that you've written? Are they in the mystery thriller genre? Have you crossed genres? Do you write any nonfiction?
No, I don't write any nonfiction, although I've thought of it. I've thought of writing an economics kind of book, handbook, and a couple of other books, but I've never actually done it. Most of my books are in the mystery genre. I write cozy mysteries for the most part. The first 3 books I wrote were just mystery, sci-fi-ish, alternate history kind of books, and then I veered over to cozy mysteries, and I stayed there until just recently. I got a contract with Lake Union, which is an imprint of Amazon, for women's fiction. The name of the book is Where Wild Peaches Grow. It'll be out August 2022. So that was different. I ventured out into a different genre, and then I hope to expand on cozy mysteries, on just writing cozy mysteries into the mystery genre. I'd like to do something a little bit more edgier, darker. So I've been bouncing around ideas in my head. Hopefully I'll get something to my agent soon and see if we can get it sold. And I do expect to write more women's fiction. I enjoyed writing it. It was hard starting out, not to kill anyone. I'm so used to killing people in all of my books. And my agent told me not to do that. So it took a minute to come around to what to do in a women's fiction book, but I enjoyed it, and I hope to write a few more.
That's wonderful. Now, Abby, before you joined, I had told the audience that there's another first on this show today. You're the first attorney who's been on our show.
Mm-hmm.
So the question for you is, how has being an attorney affected your writing, besides negotiating contracts and all that fun stuff?
Well, I have yet to write a book where there is a lawyer in the book. My ice cream series has a law professor, and that's the closest that I've gotten to it. As I said before, I was a teacher and a lawyer. I would tell people I was a teacher, and they smile and say how nice. I tell people I'm a lawyer, and they go, "Oh, really?" So I thought maybe, since I'm trying to build a fan base, I don't want to alienate people by telling them I'm, putting a lot of law in there. It affects me in different ways. It's a pet peeve I have. It was so hard a lot of times convincing clients that what they see on TV and read in books is not the real law. So it's kind of a pet peeve of mine for writers to get the law correct in books. That no one gets divorced by, a brown envelope coming to your house that you leave on the kitchen table unsigned until you get ready to, sign it. No one gets arrested and read their rights at the same time. That just doesn't happen. So those kind of things, it affects me as a reader and a writer. And I have yet to put anything in a book about one. But I do have a story that it's percolating too. A lawyer, a female lawyer, who has a case, and it's a murder mystery. So I'm kind of working that into my repertoire, and we'll see where that goes.
Hey, wait a minute, Abby. You mean to tell me that brown envelope my wife left for me on the kitchen table? Are you taking new clients?
Yeah, you'll never. You know what? Just leave it on that table because you'll never get divorced if it's sitting there.
Okay, thank you.
That's why it doesn't happen in real life, because no one will get a divorce.
You're not going to bill me for this advice, are you?
Well, I don't bill you. That means I can talk about it. If you want it to become confidential, you need to slip me $1 under the table.
Okay. Oh, I'll have you back on the show again. How about that?
Okay, how about that? That sounds good.
Actually, Con, I got a question for you. So I'm married to a lawyer. Am I your first guest that's been married to a lawyer? On your show?
Yeah, you probably are. You probably are.
You got a twofer today.
Yeah, I got a two. Matter of fact, if I had thought about this before the show, maybe I would have built it into the promotion. This was going to be our legal show for the year.
And to Abby's point, maybe nobody would have wanted to show up. So I'll just.
Well, there is one thing worse than being a lawyer, I've found. It's an IRS auditor. Those folks never tell anybody who they are. I used to know a few of the people, and they said it was really rough on the social life.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, lawyers get along with other lawyers, and people like you fine if they need your help. Otherwise, it's like, oh, lawyer, huh?
Hmm.
Yeah, so
Yeah. No, you've got my sympathies. Now, Abby, I would just like to explore your background a little bit more, and maybe you can help us. You're an economics professor, and again,
yeah.
that's the first time we've had one of those on the show too. So we got a lot of firsts today.
Okay.
I like to talk with writers about the changing dynamics of the publishing industry. We're seeing the convergence of publishing houses into fewer and fewer. And I think we're at 4, maybe going to 3. I've lost track. Um, I suspect we're probably seeing fewer agents out there because there's fewer publishing houses to work with. What is going on in this industry? We've seen it in other industries where you have a consolidation at the top. It affects competition, it affects price, it affects the earnings of people like writers or workers. What do you think is going on here? Where could it go?
Good question. I first of all, I think that the problem is the monopoly that has formed at the top, and that's Amazon. It has taken, I think, a lot of business from the independent bookstores, which in turn has, dropped the supply needed from the publishers. I think also that the publishers have found out that it's not just one type of person that reads. I think that they were aiming and trying to market to one group of individuals. And I think with this big surge in diversity, it's like they're trying to find their ground now. I don't know about competition. If you have a monopoly, there is no competition. But once the competition comes in, prices drop. And you don't see that. You haven't seen the prices drop. I think prices in books have gone up. I remember going from being self-published to traditionally published. I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to sell $11.99 Kindle when I'm used to selling 99-cent Kindles? I hadn't heard so much about publishers. Are you talking about the big 5 publishers have?
The big 5, but if you have any comments on the smaller houses that are out there, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so a lot of them are faltering. I know Midnight Ink closed, and there was another one that closed, and I think that I think the competition is too steep for them to stay into the field. I guess they were already there. I haven't the faintest idea about their practices. Midnight Ink was owned by a bigger company, and that bigger company did not fold. So I'm not quite sure about that. But I think that it's the dragon in the room. I think Amazon has a lot to do with it. The publishers are pushing back. You find, and I worry about this having a new contract with Amazon, that they won't let Amazon into bookstores. Books that are published through Amazon, they don't want them in bookstores. They don't want them in libraries and different places. So I think that it's just the problems right now, and I think they're going to be worked out. I don't know that it's such a problem of economics where people aren't buying books, because surely people are buying books more than ever. So I'm not sure so much that it's a turn in the industry as it is the industry trying to untangle itself and deal with that. And I don't know when the government is ever going to try to break up Amazon at all, if they will, because we still do have the big 5, but it's more like Amazon sometimes is winning, and I think that's the problem. It's the push against that.
I was reading recently where the French government is trying to deal with the problem with Amazon and the impact it's having on small bookstores. I don't know if either of you have ever been in Paris, but when I used to be over there, there are a lot of bookstores in Paris. And the French are very protective of their own. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens over there.
Yeah.
You know, kind
Yeah, I
of
think it'll be
honestly,
interesting.
I was going to say the parallels that you were talking about the book publishing industry. Clearly, you see that in journalism and other industries, and I do think that we have to look to Europe, right? Because Australia is looking in terms of how can we support independent journalism and make sure they get equity. You see that happening in some other European countries, not Australia, in trying to protect like privacy and whatnot. So I think those kinds of momentum is going to unfortunately come from there. And again, looking at if publishing is going the same way that journalism did, they're trying to go for economies of scale. And then when they do that, they try to flatten the market, they try to flatten the pipeline because they're trying to appeal to shareholders. But then in the consequence, they squeeze out what is the fundamental uniqueness that's built into news, information, and communication, and which is what books is, right? Books falls under that kind of storytelling. And when you try to operate at that shareholder level, you make a lot of sacrifices and you miss out on the thousands of niche audiences that you could really try to be promoting and attracting until it's too late.
Agreed. And you raise a very interesting point there, Vera, because another industry that's been affected by the digital age has been journalism. And I can remember once upon a time when there were several newspapers in New York City, quality newspapers. They had frequent book reviews. They would have dedicated mystery thriller reviewers. And I think right now maybe the New York Times might be the only one that's left. I could be wrong there, but how difficult is it now to get good book reviews when you have magazines, newspapers either going away or just discontinuing doing book reviews altogether?
Well, I think what's interesting is that the traditional means of reviewing, right, as you said, are disappearing. And it was nice to have someone whose taste you could trust to be a guide, an influence, maker or whatnot. But of course, now you have the proliferation, good or bad, of social media, of blogs, of like all these ways in which individuals can voice an opinion, right? And so we're looking at the aggregate. I will say Rotten Tomatoes actually does a pretty good job because Rotten Tomatoes looks at recognized critics, and you could parse out the individuals. Other aggregate reviews, everyone has an equal voice. Is that fair? Because I will actually step away from that kind of review and look at Yelp, because is it really fair that a vegan puts in a review about a steakhouse restaurant, and I've seen many, I've seen many of those reviews, right? Is that fair that that person has a voice? I get what they're trying to say, but is it appropriate, right? So I think that while yes, there is so much of that kind of trustworthy person, but they're not the only voice in the room. I think the question is, how can we celebrate the diversity of voices? Because that's the other upside downside, is that when you have a tastemaker, are they of a certain type, and they don't recognize when other authors don't have an opportunity to be celebrated because they're just sort of they're a different style, they're a different background, they're a different taste.
Well, as a back with a background in economics, I look at the market as a whole, and I always think that the market is going to adjust. It's gonna, it takes in all these factors and it adjusts to what's going on in the marketplace. So I feel like everything will adjust, and it will to all the new inputs and all the outputs that have been taken out. I know I haven't been in the industry a long time, so I wasn't used to all the newspapers doing reviews, and I heard about you'd send your press release to different newspapers across the country and get reviews and things. So now it's adjusted that. So when I entered the market, it's Kirkus and Publishers Weekly and now the New York Times and things. And so for me, that's the norm. If I can get a review in those places, or at home we still have one newspaper, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, I'm good with those. So for me, it's there's nothing wrong with the market because I entered it in a time when that's where the market was. Maybe it would be nice for more newspapers to do it, but we don't have those newspapers anymore. And so,
Yeah.
writers and everything will find a way to get those reviews or get the press releases out to different arenas. Now it's, more so the internet. You do so many things on the internet, do a sponsored Instagram or whatever it is that makes up for those things. So now there's substitutions.
No, you're right with substitution. We've had on this show several mystery bloggers, people who run blogs and they review mysteries, thrillers. Some specialize in cozy mysteries. That seems to be something that's developing, that's new. It doesn't have the profit motive of the old newspapers and magazines. Mm-hmm. So we're keeping an eye on, and we periodically invite the bloggers in to talk about what they're seeing.
All right.
A question for both of you: how difficult is it now for a writer to get started in the trade?
Well, I think it's easy because you can self-publish. It used to be that you couldn't self-publish. Then the vanity presses came and made it, too expensive to publish. And now you can truly self-publish. And I teach classes, and I always say self-publishing basically is free. You write your book, and you can upload it on Amazon, and you don't have to pay a penny. Now, of course, you want to get it edited, but I don't believe in paying an editor, $1,200 to $2,000, because I believe in the writing community. You have people who can help you there, proofreaders, beta readers. If you need a developmental editor, you shouldn't be writing to get your story out. You should be able to discuss it with people in your group, work your story out. And not that you shouldn't be writing at all. I want to clarify that. I feel like you should be taking craft classes to learn how to write. And you can get so many of those craft classes for free at your local library. I live in Cleveland, in the county of Cuyahoga, and we have 28 branches, I believe. And we offer but the library offers craft classes to teach you how to write. So it's very easy. If you want to publish now, all you have to do is write your book. I think the hard part is finishing a book. I speak to people all the time that will tell me, I've been working on this book for 7 years or 10 years, or, I've started 7 books or 5 books and I haven't finished any of them. That's the hard part. But if you can get through that, you can be a published author.
This is sorry, go ahead.
No, please, Vera, please continue. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, no, this is great because my opinion is the opposite of Abby, but I think Abby is self-driven in a way very differently than how I'm driven. I come from a very traditional, I was paid by a newspaper, I was paid by, so this is kind of so I have a very traditional path. And I know self-publishing, and I think part of it is too, is my parents were entrepreneurs, and I see how much work that is, and so I wanted to go the opposite direction, right? They were immigrants to the country. They were, my mom, I said, was an English teacher. My dad had been a chemist, but they ended up, owning their own business because that's the way that they could survive in the United States. And so I never wanted to go through that. So I went, and I think the challenge is if you work full time and then you try to get traditionally published on the side, getting an agent took me a very, very long time. And part of it is like, you have to be immersed in the world. I do feel like there is still the center of the book publishing universe, and same thing with journalism too, is still centered around New York. And so there's when you come from the West Coast, there's a different attitude sometimes that agents have with you. I've gone to many of the pitching things and, try to learn, how to get into the publishing world in a certain type of way. And this is probably where I was probably one of the things that was probably blocking myself. But anyway, I was trying to follow a route, and it just took me a very, very long time. And when I finally found my agent, she really got it. So when you find the agent that understands your work, it's a bit of a miracle because it is such a. I belong to so many writing groups on Facebook and whatnot, where people who want to find an agent, people who want to be novelists, and they all sort of come across. They share these stories of how difficult it is. So I think that Abby is 100% correct. If you want to self-publish, boom. If you have the drive of the will and the savvy, you definitely can do that for you. And there's a lot of support. If you are trying to do this on the side and you're not good at certain things, or if you are good at it but not good for yourself at it, then it's going to be quite a challenge for you.
You're both very encouraging, and I'm happy to hear this. That yes, the industry is changing, but the digital age, the internet is putting more and more tools in the hands of writers, permitting people to come together. And personally, I think there's probably going to be the world of writing and publishing is going to be very different in the next 20, 30 years.
Well, yeah, but I think that has happened from the last 30 years. It's really different,
True.
Than 30 years ago. I think that, it's what you want out of it, because, your question was how easy to be published. It's easy to be published, but as Vera said, then what path are you taking to get published? Because being traditionally published, she's right, that's hard work. That's hard work. I didn't have a hard time doing it. I didn't have to look for an agent. I didn't have to look for a publishing company or anything like that. So, but I know I've heard so many people talk about it. So that's hard. But it's the path that you want to take. It's there for you nowadays. And 30 years ago, as a Black woman, or as a woman, or anything other than a white male, it probably would have been almost impossible for me to do. So I think, as it evolves, the publishing industry is evolving, and yes, it's changing. And 30 years from now, it'll be completely different.
And,
Yes.
and I think some of the main differences in why someone would want to be traditionally published, those reasons may fall apart, right? Like, which is appear in bookstores, be eligible for certain contests, be eligible for certain recognition. Like, there is this divide, and of course, the traditional publishing will want to protect these infrastructures that they set up. But if they're unable to invest in developing certain marketplaces, if they're unable to invest in new distribution pipelines, if they're unable to invest in certain technologies, because you see, if I was in the business of wanting to have 1 million followers, I would have to, change my personality and get on TikTok, frankly, right? Like, be an influencer in that way. Because, but that's not what I want to do. My reason for writing is quite different. So again, once book publishing, and this happens for many traditional industries, not just book publishing, but if we can cross over, figure out like where the audiences are, because it's kind of obvious where the audiences are and what they want and how to speak to them. And I refuse to believe, for instance, right, because you often hear this, like, oh, well, this kind of audience doesn't read books or doesn't do this, doesn't do that. And you're like, you just are not having the right kind of conversation, and perhaps you're not the right person to bring that conversation to those audiences, because I will guarantee you that you will find the same types of interest in Twitter, in Medium, in Substack, in TikTok, in Cameo. Like, those audiences, you will find the subset of readers there.
Good point. Very, very good point. What advice do you have for upcoming writers, people who want to begin to write?
Finish your book. If you're writing,
Good one.
that's the best advice I can give you. Finish it. Or, start it but then finish it. People come to me and say, people always tell me I should write a book because I went through this or I went through that. Everybody goes through something. That's not a reason to write a book. But if you're going to write it about that, you got to have a hook. You got to have something to draw people in. And I don't think it's hard to write a book. You just sit down and you write. There's a lot of rules to it, and you'll get to that, but just put pen to paper to get started. But my advice always is finish your book.
Yeah, I would say too is you need to get out of your own way once you finish that book, because I think that trying to teach yourself how to write, if you're not used to that, can be very difficult. People end up writing kind of like an essay or a memoirish thing, and they don't know how to do the storytelling. So that's one. But also to have an understanding why you want to write that book, right? If you're doing it just to leave a legacy for your family, yes, you can self-publish and then you don't have to go through this. If you want to be a best-selling author, then you have to go a very different route. It might be more important for you to develop as a platform, So I think that to understand why you're doing something is very essential as well.
I think we could find thousands of self-published authors that would disagree with you, Vera. There are many. There's a group on Facebook that for authors, self-published authors that make over $50,000 a year. There are plenty of self-published authors who have that recognition that have lots of fan base, a huge fan base. They're making lots of money, and they get to keep all of their money. I know several that sold, their first book over 1 million copies. That's more than a lot of traditionally published authors. So I think
sorry,
it's
I
just
didn't mean
what
to say. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to say that you have to be traditionally published. Sorry, because I've been in like conferences where like, oh, I write the story, but I don't want to talk to anybody about my story. That's what I mean. Whether you're self-published or traditional, if you write something and you want other people to read it, then there's a reality in which you'll have to talk to people, whatever path you choose, to make your book available and to be able to give people a reason why to read your book. That's what I mean.
Yeah, well, if you're traditionally published, you're gonna have to do that too, because they
Absolutely.
don't, like for Midnight Hour. Yeah, for Midnight Hour, we didn't even get a publicist. So you gotta be out there and you gotta talk it up. When I got my agent, she wanted me to she wanted to know about my social media platforms, how many people I had following me and things, because now you have to market your own book. You have to really get out there and make it happen.
That's very, very true, Abby. More and more writers who I meet, when they're talking to agents, if they're fortunate enough to talk to a publisher, they want to know about their social media
Right.
community. How many followers do they have? How active are they?
Right.
Mhm.
And they want to know what you're doing if you're not doing anything to publish a book. They used to send authors, when we talk about the difference 30 years ago, they'd send them not only on book tours, but when they were ready to write their next book and it took place in Egypt, they would give them a budget so they could go to Egypt, immerse themselves so that you could write what you know. And they don't do that now. They want you to come up with your own things. They do have a Bible, where they say, can you write a book about this for us? But mostly it's, you come up with your idea. If they don't like it, they don't publish you. And once they publish you, they expect you to be able to go out and sell that book and get people to follow you. So it's a lot of hard work.
No, it is.
A lot of hard work. Yeah.
It is. And I work with writers on, in my real life job, I'm a social media consultant. And for writers, it's developing that online presence, how to work with the tools, how to begin. I agree. The publishing firms will take care of the top tier. If you're Stephen King, if you're James Patterson, you're J.K. Rowling, you're fine. But everybody else is pretty much left to their own devices. I know one author, he's a New York Times bestseller. He published a book just before the pandemic. Publisher, one of the big four, did virtually nothing for him. The advice that he got from them was pretty poor. So you're on your own from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, you're on your own whether you self-publish or traditionally publish.
Yes.
You're on your own when it comes to marketing. I have a publicist with Penguin, and they put things out, but for to build that relationship that you need to sell books, that was pretty much on my own.
Yep. Let's talk about the other 800-pound monster in the room, the pandemic. How is that, do you think, going to affect your writing and others' writing going forward? Will we see that in the storyline?
For me, no.
Oh, go ahead, Abby.
Go ahead, dear.
I was actually, because it was taking so long to find an agent, I wrote a book. And then once my agent, I got an agent, it was taking so long to shop the book, I wrote another book. So I'm almost done with the third one. Abby, you'll be proud of me, even though the third one's taking forever. But I had I always, because I do allude to technologies in my book, but I don't want to seem dated, because, like, if you read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, right, he talks about using a Palm OS. Like, that thing is, like, outdated as soon as it hits the shelves, right? So I try to write about, like, kind of a social networking like world, but try to write in a futuristic way. And I accidentally started creating a world in which the pandemic lent itself quite well. And it was actually even a world in which the social justice movements of 2020 lent itself right well. So I think that people are very much struggling with that. But, it is going to be really hard unless you're really escapist, which is many people are doing it, but like that pandemic, at least like some kind of sliver is going to make it in. Is going to have to make it in, whether it's literal or figurative, right? Like isolation, political differences, just a sliver of that of what has happened because the U.S. definitely has been politically wrenched by the pandemic was used as a political tool, unfortunately, right? So I think it's like some mood of it is going to infiltrate one way or another, if not, even if there's no mention of the pandemic itself.
Well, Vera, I am very proud of you. Kudos to you for getting those books done and finished. So the pandemic will not show up in my book. I am not William Shakespeare. I don't care about that, and he wrote a couple books, Romeo and Juliet, one of them. And I don't know if you recall in there, whoever tried to kill themselves first, I think it was Romeo, was sending a message to Juliet saying, I'm not really dead. You might hear that I'm dead, but I'm not really dead. But the messenger actually got quarantined because of the pandemic and was unable to dispatch that letter. And so Juliet didn't know it was a trick and killed herself. And then, of course, Romeo killed himself, actually killed himself that time. So, I know when it happens, it works when things like that happen. They work into the story, but I am tired of the pandemic and I do not want it in my stories. So right now, no, I'm not writing anything in there. As a matter of fact, the book that I have coming out in January, it's called A Killer Sunday. One of my characters had the chicken pox, and my editor was just so stressed with me, saying, it was contagious. Or she goes, can you just make sure that you make it clear that it's not contagious because of all the stuff that's going on? So something as simple as this chicken pox, which probably almost every child has, caused an uproar, because you don't want to, it's such a heavy thing on our society right now and weighing down on everyone. Yeah, you don't want to keep bringing it up. So unless it's 20 years from now, when I'm 107, something 117, however old I'll be, I don't think that I'll ever put it in a book. I'm done with pandemic.
Okay.
I'm sad about your chickenpox reference, though. That is kind of, like this is actually a little bit of what I mean, is that something as straightforward as that, you had to be challenged a bit. That's
Yep.
crazy.
Yep.
Last question for both of you. What are your future projects? What can we expect to see from you?
Go ahead, Vera.
At least 2 published books. one thing that about the pandemic that you didn't quite ask, but you asked about the writing. It's also about the the backlog in which editors have not been reading because they were so uncertain as to what would happen. That what is it, my agent started pushing in February, and what is it, November, December, and some people are still after summer break, people finally got back to their backlog, and I don't know what they were doing in the meantime. I'm sure they were doing a lot of stuff, but on my end it's well, that's a long time to take a hesitation break. So I'm hoping. Oh yes, do you have insights into that, Abby? Because
during the pandemic, I got 4 book contracts. So I don't know what your editors doing, but mine were reading books. I actually got 4 books.
Good for you.
4 book contracts. But I forgot the question. Future stuff. Yeah. So those books that I got the contract for are coming out. And the 2 came out November 9th, Midnight Hour, as well as Body and Soul Food, and the second book I think comes out in August. And then I did my first women's fiction book, as I said, Where Wild Peaches Grow, and it'll be published by Lake Union. And then what else did I? Oh, and then I have finally Akashic. I'm not sure how to pronounce that publisher's name. They do noirs for different cities. Finally, one has come to Cleveland, and I was asked to participate. So I'm writing a noir, which I had to look up in order to. And I think I've written one before. I just didn't realize what I was writing. I think the story, The Bridge, is kind of noir. The story that's in Midnight Hour. So I just finished that short story. So I'll be in another anthology. And hopefully, as I said, I'll be able to write more women's fiction and some more mystery that's more dark.
Good. Very good. Well, we look forward to seeing your writing and having both of you back with us. And
Thank
right
you.
now, I'd like to thank both of you, Abby and Vera, for joining us today. I'm sorry that we had to postpone it from earlier in November, but at least we got the show out, and I'm very happy to have you here to talk about your books, talk about the crime writers of color, and what's going on in the industry. And I'd just like to thank our audience for joining us today. I'd like you to come back next month. Well, actually, we won't be having another broadcast in December. Our next event is going to be on January 17th, and we'll have more details about the guests before then. So this is our last broadcast. We're taking a little bit of a break for the holidays. So I'd like to wish everybody a happy Hanukkah, which I know just ended, but we're a little late. Christmas, Kwanzaa, or else you may happen to be celebrating this year. Our live broadcast is ending now, but I'd just like to say that please contact me at Con P. Sweeney at someti.com if you have suggestions for panelists, ideas for shows, or you wish to participate yourself. Also, I'm learning that putting on a show like this isn't easy. So if you'd like to volunteer to help out on our stage crew, just let us know. Thank you again for joining, and see you again next year.